this is our webinar that we have always had with Kristen and Todd, who are now members of Circana. Kristen Classi-Zummo is the apparel advisor at Circana, and Todd Mick is the Intimates advisor, and they're going to be sharing with us information about what they've defined as the growth culture, trying to decode the information on fashion and the shifts in fashion and intimates. So without further ado, we're going to start. And Todd, I guess who starts? You or Kristen?
I'll kick it off. Thank you, Ellen.
Okay, no problem.
Okay, excellent. So again, thank you everyone for your patience as we just kind of navigated some technical difficulties. So as Ellen introduced us, you should all know who we are. Todd and I, we are from Circana. So I usually, while I'm not a board member or a member of Underfashion Club, I am the apparel advisor at Circana. And I frequently join my colleague, Todd Mick, and we really do this tag team presentation where I deliver high-end insights of what's going on in the apparel industry. And then Todd will really dig deep and take it down to what's going on within Intimates. So just a little bit about who we are, because you might be thinking, who is Circana? What is this? Used to be NPD. What is this change? So about a year ago, NPD merged with IRI and we became Circana. So within that, we are tracking over $3 trillion of consumer spending. So we could see what consumers are buying at the grocery stores, what beauty they're buying, how they're splurging on footwear, how they're fixing their cars, and even, what apparel they're buying, where they're shopping for their intimates. Are they buying lace bras, panties? So we can really dive into all of that. So today, Todd and I, with this big, complete consumer view, we frequently talk to our clients, and I'll tell you, things are more chaotic and confusing than ever, right? And pretty much daily, I get a question from our clients asking, what is going on with consumer spending? What is the current state today of consumer spending? Because there are so many conflicting factors happening. Even to the latest results today with the CPI numbers, things are cooling, but not at the rate we want. We know consumers are spending, but higher prices. There's a lot of confusing things out there. So when I think about the current state of consumer spending, it's really complicated, right? It's, think about that Facebook, relationship status. It's complicated. There's a lot happening. There are a lot of conflicting factors at play when it comes to the consumer. They are mounting headwinds that we're consistently dealing with. Consumers are facing mounting debt and depleted savings. All of that pent-up savings that we had during COVID, well, that's done. We saw consumer spending earlier on, and we're seeing now that savings that was built up is starting to dwindle down. Inflation, it's cooling down, but not at the rate we would like. Prices remain higher than ever, and that's leading consumers to trade down in certain areas and trade down with certain industries. There are global distractions. It's an election year. We know that tends to impact how consumers are shopping and overall retail, in particular apparel. And really just zoning in on what's going on in apparel, we continue to see a challenged demand cycle when it comes to apparel purchasing. Now, in the face of all of these headwinds, uh-oh is right. I don't know who said that, but uh-oh is right. So in the face of all these headwinds,
that was me.
In the face of all these headwinds, though, there are clear tailwinds that are propelling the consumers to continue to spend. So they are splurging strategically. Even though they're pulling back, we know that consumers are splurging on $50 Stanleys. It was one of the breakout brands this past year. And again, we know brands are doing well in the industry. It's not just about completely trading down to private label. We're seeing national brands are performing better. Consumers are still paying for convenience. Even though they're looking for ways to save, they're not going to skip out on making their lives easier. And we know this upcoming summer, many of you in New York, it's the first really nice warm day we have. We're getting excited. We know consumers are splurging on travel and experiences this upcoming summer. And there's a lot of trends driving that growth. Although apparel is down, we're seeing where there are trends, there's glimmers of hope. So these contradictory consumer behaviors make it hard to predict and even harder to plan as a brand, as a retailer. So we're here to be your partners. This is what we're going to dive into today. We're going to talk about overall retail performance, and we'll really focus in on apparel. What impacted spending in 2023? What are we expecting in 2024? And then I'm going to hand it over to Todd to give a broad Intimates overview. What did we see trending last year, and where is the industry headed?
And we
So,
will have some strategies for growth because there's always growth capable.
and
Always.
that's why we're here, right? So before we dive into apparel, I always like to start big picture because, it's not just about your, retail competitor in the intimate space or another bra brand. But when we see consumers being careful with their spending, your competitor is what's going on at the grocery store. It's what streaming services consumers are buying. It's all about share of wallet. So with that, let's take a look at overall all of the industries we track at Circana to see which industries are growing, which industries are declining, just so you get a sense of where consumers spent last year. So this is looking at all of the industries we tracked, and they're ranked on growth to decline. And you see here the number one industry that led growth, media entertainment. Now, that's really interesting because it knocked prestige beauty out of the number one spot. And prestige beauty has been growing for, I think it's been about 2 years now of consistent growth. They just barely outgrew, but still media entertainment is number one. What's going on here? Two things are driving that growth. One, large price increases we saw happen at different streaming services. Many of us felt this past year. Our Netflix, Hulu, Disney Plus all increased prices, put in additional price tiers, and that helped bolster the industry. Additionally, what also helped grow media entertainment was an increase in buying, renting, and streaming big blockbuster theatrical releases. Think Barbie and Oppenheimer, these big movies that got all of the attention this summer and had a lot of attention at the box office, brought all of us into the movies to watch it. We dressed up, we got excited. That excitement translated to an increase in buying the movie, paying to rent the movie, paying to stream the movie. So this is really indicative of a bigger trend, right? And I've talked about it a little before, is these big cultural moments that are getting attention are also getting spend. These big moments are having a halo impact on spending we're seeing. So, everyone watching the Super Bowl this year, Taylor Swift going there, everyone, tweeting about it, not tweeting about it, but talking about it, it's all over TikTok. That had an impact on, paying for subscriptions to watch it. That had an impact on buying apparel, to support the teams. So again, these big cultural moments are something we continue to see impact the industry despite consumers pulling back. All right, so now let's dig into apparel. And I think I just want to make one comment. Ellen, I don't know if it was mentioned earlier. You guys know we always take questions. So if you want to put your questions in the chat at the end, Ellen, we can work on reading them out loud and make sure we're addressing questions. So
Right.
just wanted to call that out. So what happened in apparel this past year? So apparel was about $243 billion, down 4% compared to last year. Now, apparel in 2023 was higher than 2019, so we spent more than we were pre-pandemic. However, 2023, we still didn't meet the threshold that we set post-pandemic in 2021 and 2022. Those years post-pandemic, we saw this surge of apparel replenishment. Consumers were getting vaccinated, they were stepping out, they were getting out, and they were replenishing their apparel as they did so. So this past year, while we were above pre-pandemic spending, we saw that we didn't reach that high water mark from the past 2 years. Now this is looking at dollars. When we look at units, which is really an indicator of true demand, it's telling a very different story. So units overall were down 7% in 2023. Now, compared to 2019, we saw units were also down. But what I really think now, it's scary to think that compared to pre-pandemic, we saw a decline in units. But what I really think is interesting is this past year, compared to 2020, we were only 6% higher. So compared to a year where, for most of the year, we were all dealing with a global pandemic and we were staying home, we weren't buying apparel, demand in 2023 was only 6% higher. A lot of that is pull forward demand that we saw in 21 and 22. Consumers continue to face higher prices across their wallet. They're making tough decisions and they're choosing not to replenish apparel since they bought it, within the past 1 to 2 years. And until this demand returns, we're not going to see growth overall in the industry. Average selling price is up 3%, but that growth is cooling. We're comping against 8% growth in 2022. So again, prices are higher than ever, but that growth is really starting to come down. Now, when we look at different demographics, who drove growth and decline, what's really interesting is that we saw every generation declined in apparel, from Gen Z all the way to boomers. And now Gen Z and millennials made up over 2/3 of the losses within apparel, but those losses were really driven by millennials. Millennials represented 58% of the losses. That resulted in $5 billion lost in 2023. Now, the fact that we see every generation declining, again, it's hinting towards consumers replenished, they're holding back, they're making other discretionary purchases based on limited spend. But there's something else going on with millennials. Millennials are in a new life stage. When we looked at our checkout tracking data, which looks at consumer receipts, so we didn't just look at apparel, but we looked across their wallet. Where did we see growth when we looked at their receipts? Where was their decline? We saw there was growth with millennials in more necessities, paying for needs, furnishing their homes, fixing their cars. Of course, they continue to splurge on beauty, but all around where we saw growth across the wallet, it was these different industries catering to their new necessities, bills, their homes, their cars, even growth in kids apparel. Now, I know there's a lot of conversations that millennials are not buying homes. They're not buying homes for themselves. They're staying home longer than ever. We do see that millennials, this is looking at census data, millennials is the smallest share within their generation to be homeowners, but they are the fastest growing. So think about the implications if we see interest rates start to come down a little bit, the housing market loosen up. We're likely going to see this generation explode. So just thinking about your core consumer, how are you aligning with the generation with the largest buying power? Millennials have new responsibilities. They're really changing where they spend. We know they do continue to splurge, but they do have other necessities that they're paying for. Think about how you're leaning into convenience. Think about how you're catering to their lifestyles. All of these opportunities are there with millennials, but it's really for the right brands to make sure they activate it. Now, while it hasn't been the greatest news in apparel, we're seeing declines overall, there are some glimmers of hope, right? And I have to kind of end it on a bit of a bright note. While comfort has really been the dominant trend over the past few years, and it remains important, we're really starting to see the tide turn. I think we're starting to see this return to style. We've asked consumers this survey question over the past few years, and just comparing the past two, while comfort is growing and still, the top response of what people want when they're buying apparel, we saw actually style grew faster. And if we think about, this big activewear boom that we saw happen in, 2021 and 2022, this loungewear, athleisure, whatever you like to call it, it was really an anti-fashion trend, right? It was all about comfort. It was all about lounging. But we're starting to see that turn away. We're starting to see comfort is important. We've set a new threshold of what consumers want to wear, but style is starting to come more into play. And we're seeing it with the categories where we're forecasting growth. Categories that are really about blending, comfortable, dressing high, dressing low, but have a sense of style are the ones that are going to drive the overall industry. What does that look like? That looks like sport coats and blazers, jeans, skirts, dress shirts, bodysuits, These categories have been slow growth drivers this past year, and we expect this growth to continue into 2024 as consumers are still looking for a way to blend how they're outfitting themselves. This has implications on the intimates and what they're buying. And speaking of intimates, we do forecast growth for women's intimates in 2025. So overall, 2024 is going to be a challenging year. I will say we're seeing declines so far in the first 2 months of the year. We are forecasting 2024 as a whole to be down. And as a total industry, we're anticipating growth to come in 2025, and intimates is going to be a big driver of that. So again, just thinking about, these category waves of growth are going to slow down, where we see activewear driving growth and tailored driving growth. It's really about cherry picking comfort and dressing up. I know, Todd, we love to call it polished comfort, right? So think about the opportunities as what we're wearing on the outside is really reflective also of what we wear on the inside. How do you incorporate that aspect of style, newness, color, but also with comfort being an underlining force behind that?
And Kristen,
yeah.
Kristen, I'm just thinking about sort of the success at Abercrombie and Fitch and how they've turned around their women's business. And, it's all about, and I think there was an article in the Wall Street Journal, it's really about understanding her total wardrobe for going away on the weekend and sort of thinking about that in terms of both apparel and intimate apparel, how that changes.
Todd, excellent call out. So Abercrombie and Fitch, they just had earnings. They had an excellent earnings call. In our data, they were up double digits. What's interesting is when we focused on millennials, because like I said, I didn't tell a great story about millennials. Millennials were down, they've been challenged, but that's Abercrombie's core consumer. Abercrombie and Fitch, their growth in total was 2 times as high for millennials. So they really exceeded that growth when we looked at the millennial consumer. So what did they do? This consumer that's not buying apparel, how did they reach them? Well, Todd, you hit the nail on the head. They grew up with them. They're not just outfitting her to, go out with her friends, but they realize she has a family. She's going to work, she's in business, she's working out, and they have expanded their assortment to cater to all of these outfitting opportunities. So, but it's right, and I kind of have it here. It's about having a mixed but category adjacent assortment. So how do you really expand those outfitting opportunities? If you're focusing on intimates, it doesn't really maybe make sense to get into, suits, but what are some of those category adjacent outfitting opportunities? Bodysuits being one that we definitely see being worn under, being worn over. So thinking about that, how you really kind of, offering a multitude of those outfitting opportunities. So, and Todd, you mentioned outfitting her to go away, and travel continues to be a lever of growth. So, despite consumers pulling back and all this talk about inflation, we know consumers are going away, they're spending. Delta just had their earnings call. I think they beat, they've had the best results that I think they've ever had. This is looking at the chart on the left is monthly TSA passenger counts. And what's interesting is 2024, which is in the yellow, is just in line where we were in 2020, right before COVID hit. So it's going to be interesting to get those numbers in March to see, well, where do we diverge in 2024 versus now then 2020 started to plummet. And at Circana, we have a monthly survey that we put out. And we asked consumers, do you plan to go away? Where are you going? And we know that over 40% of consumers plan to travel for leisure more in 2024 than they did in 2023. And that was up 11 points versus last year when we asked the question. So knowing that consumers, their spending is limited, but they're going away, how do you activate travel? Thinking about your assortment, thinking about your consumer, thinking about your capabilities. There's so many opportunities. It's not just about having a full swim assortment and cover-ups and beachwear, but it could just be using this, marketing terms, imagery. We see how footwear, there's this new technology of slip-ons that's being used and associated with travel. Beauty, buying makeup, minis, while we see a lot of growth in minis just from people buying minis because they're less expensive, we're seeing growth of using minis to travel. So how are you aligning, using, in-store merchandising, how you're talking, your social media to cater to a lot of these opportunities? All right, so just to wrap it up, some implications for 2024. So we continue to see, we're forecasting declines in 2024. Those declines will improve though. They're going to be better than what we saw in 2023. However, we're not expected to see growth in 2025. That's at a total apparel level, and that's true for women's intimates as well. Really understand your consumers' new behaviors. Millennials at a new life stage. You know, they're buying for their families, they have homes. How are you really catering to them? It's about outfitting them with the right opportunities and about aligning with their price point, as their budget has to cover so many other areas. Lean into upcoming replenishment opportunities. Again, think about that varied assortment. You know, we saw that apparel was really replenished in 21 and 22. Some of those replenishment cycles are going to be popping back up again in 24 and 25. How are you leaning into that? Experiential economy is going to be a growth driver. I've said it before, I'm going to continue to say it again, whether it's travel, whether it's the next big movie. You know, you don't have to have a character license to be part of a big event. You know, going back to the Barbie movie, any pink, you know, assortment you might have in store, how do you merchandise it together? Something just to tap, to tack on to that buzz that's really already generating. Look ahead. What are some of the new releases that are coming up? Olympics is this summer. It's going to be a lot of buzz on social media. How can you play into that? And also thinking about high-low dressing. That is going to, we're not going to see these big category waves of growth where, you know, anything that was activewear, sports bras, bralettes, active bottoms was growing. It's really about cherry picking these categories. So how are intimates going to play into that? It's good news, meaning that we're not going to see big declines in one area, but it's just about leaning into newness and innovation. And again, catering to her lifestyle. All right,
Thank
so
you,
with that,
Kristen.
Todd, you're welcome. Take it
Yeah,
away.
no. I mean, really amazing insights and sort of what's happening with the consumer. And again, we're just lucky we have all this data, and we really get now to understand our total spend and sort of the implications for the business. So if you can flip to the next slide. It's always good to kind of start off how intimates did compared to total women's apparel. It's around the same, but women's intimate lost a little bit of share in sort of the total women's apparel wallet, down 4.6% versus last year, whereas women's apparel was down 3.4%. And we're going to get a little bit more detail. And so there's not a lot of purple. And in our new Circana world, purple's the new green. Purple means growth. But you are going to notice a little trend, because women's pants and also skirts and skirts grew. Part of that was minis, but part of it was also just there's so much more interesting volumes and cuts and flares and sort of leg openings in bottoms that she needs to replenish to stay current. So again, giving her something new makes her want to buy these categories. And so again, and bottoms is a really interesting one, because again, there's been denim is the skinny jean is now declared over, even though people still wear it. And again, pants are much wider and with a drop crotch, and also higher waisted. So again, lots of interesting things happening. And in terms of intimate apparel, again, bras fared better than panties, but that's mostly because of sort of the sports bra replenishment kicking in. And this is taking a look at the total intimates market, and we also include sleepwear in this graph here. And the first time that Kristen and I presented in person at the Harvard Club for the Underfashion Club, we showed this same chart, and essentially it was flat because, and yes, leggings are part of women's pants, actually, and hosiery. We'll answer that question later. But what you're seeing here is really sort of demand, settling into sort of more normalized levels. And we're sort of predicting that, again, a couple of years out, this is going to be sort of a very flat graph, because the truth is intimates is a mature business, and what everyone's job is in the future is really to steal share from either retailers, other DTC brands, or other competitive brands within your space. Because again, this is a mature market. And when we look at the categories, we can see that both non-sport bras and panties were down about 5%. Again, sport bras were up 1%, and that was all related to the fact that there was people needed to replenish their sports bras because they bought a ton of active two or 3 years ago. But also there's been a ton of new innovation in sports bras. In fact, what we're seeing is the athletic brands are actually acting much more like designer bra brands with a lot more elevated aesthetics in terms of bonding, delicate straps. And again, it's much less about performance and more about just looking great and sort of having a great workout. Again, there's still that performance aspect of the business, but the Elite bra, which is the new Nike bra, is really sort of a much more elevated aesthetic. And actually, when you walk into a Nike store, their sports bra department actually is all body tones, and it looks more like an intimate department than it does a Nike activewear department. So it's kind of interesting. And again, that goes back to Nike stealing ideas from the intimates market because they need to grow their share of the women's market. So that's kind of an interesting example of sort of this market share graph that's happening. When we look at shapewear, just go back 1 second. Shapewear was down 14%. And again, that's mostly related to replenishment. Shapewear is one of those categories that you buy it for a special occasion and then you don't need it for a couple of years. And that definitely is kicked in here. The other thing that's factoring into this decline is the fact that there's a real dupes culture in shapewear. So brands like True Kind and Impetua are sort of duping top sellers in Maidenform and Spanx. And what we're seeing is that while unit demand is still up, average selling price is going down in shapewear. So that's really and in a way, there's also there's this high end, the whole Skims phenomena, which is definitely still working. And fortunately, we're now tracking Skims sales at Amazon and Nordstrom and other stores. And then sort of there's this lower end dupe culture by True Kind. So it's interesting that there's sort of this bifurcation of the market in shapewear.
Todd, there's a question.
Yeah.
I'm actually just going to interrupt you.
Yeah.
What is the daywear category from the previous slide, which I'm assuming?
Yeah. So daywear is really camis and slips. It's a very, very small part of the business. And a couple of brands are in there but it's something that we track, but it's not a really big important category. And so, it's really important to sort of understand where consumers are shopping for their intimates. And what's interesting here is what you're finding is the smaller players actually are having all the growth. Not that e-commerce and pure play and Amazon is small, but it is small compared to specialty stores. But sort of e-com, pure play, ASSG, and warehouse clubs are really the growth channels and where customers are shopping. A lot of that has to do with the convenience and also the assortment driven, because Amazon is an endless assortment. ASSG has that very sports specific assortment in sports bras. And then warehouse clubs, she's shopping for groceries, she's shopping for clothing, and she's shopping for intimates. And again, it's a very item driven business, but it's a very big opportunity for growth. And I actually just saw a meme, and it was about sort of a 45-year-old man saying, I finally come to the stage of my life that I actually think club clothes are okay. Clothes from clubs are okay. So again, I think it is actually, again, they're really growing their apparel business. And what's interesting is we have tools to sort of really understand that, called our retailer gateways for Costco, BJ's, and Sam's Club. So it's a really interesting part of the retail scene. At the other end of the business is specialty stores. And even with Abercrombie and Fitch doing well, again, this is intimate. So Victoria's Secret is losing share. And that's really sort of impacted that specialty store decline, unfortunately. So we talked a lot about a bifurcation of the market. And we've been talking about that for 2 or 3 years because it's just part of what's sort of happening. But really, we're kind of relabeling that. It's really sort of a hollowing out of the middle, because what's happening is that value customer, that under $50,000 household, is growing. And again, Walmart and Target and Ross and off price is getting that customer. But sort of the big chunk of sort of that middle income customer is really in decline. And the up plus $200,000 household income is also growing. So again, there's definitely a lot of business to be had in the value chain. And then for sort of more elevated brands, definitely businesses there because that customer is still shopping. And, Kristen and I always have an innovation timeline in all of our presentations because innovation drives growth but we're going to say that this is it's a little bit of a sparse innovation timeline, unfortunately. I personally thought the Icon bra was a smart move on Victoria's Secret part. It was kind of a custom lift for a new generation, but there wasn't the right communication and it just did not resonate as much as to really sort of move the needle in their business. One thing that I do think is very interesting, and while it's men's oriented, Skims entered the designer underwear market, and they entered it with male athletic stars because essentially they're the new fashion influencers in menswear. So, and again, we think that was a brilliant launch. The nipple bra pushing boundaries but we don't think that's going to be a really big seller. As well as sort of the Skims Swarovski collab, which again makes complete sense, but it's really not going to do a ton of volume. Adaptive is obviously a really important segment of the market and growing, but probably not enough to sort of really move the needle for Victoria's Secret. But one retailer that's doing well and continues to do well actually over the past 3 or 4 years is Soma. And it's really, they do a great job of sort of melding together comfort, support, lift, and pretty. And again, their new Everyday Elegance collection, which might look a little bit about like Chantel Nora. But the truth is, again, this is really resonating with their customer. And one of the things that Soma has done quite well is they've really down-aged their customer. They've probably taken about 10 years off their average consumer's age. And that's a really big, that's like a big thing to do. It's a tall order. Again, they also sort of delved into wire-free comfort in a very Soma way. They have a new lace soft bra. They have that in a mesh version. And again, really sort of silken and lustrous. So again, it's very sort of on brand and on the brand DNA of Soma as they continue to do well. And Adore Me is also another retailer that continues to grow. They're attracting, it's a different business model. The assortment is much more pretty, lacy, very much younger. So this was a really smart acquisition for Victoria's Secret. And again, we see this retailer growing in our data. And again, they did a great job just sort of getting the brand out all across the country in major metropolitan areas in their outdoor advertising. So, we've shared a little bit of tough news in the apparel market and in the intimate apparel market. But sort of how do brands grow in a down market? And, we're here to offer hope. And so it's really all about bringing new buyers to your brand. And at Circana, we believe in a theory, a school of thought that was created by Byron Sharp. He was a famous marketing professor, I think at UCLA or Stanford. And this theory is 50 years old, but it is relevant today as when it was showcased in 1970. And again, it's, you can go to the next slide. And again, whoops. The book is called How Brands Grow, and it's just based on the fact that it's really important to sort of track consumers over time and analyze how their behaviors are evolving, how they're switching between brands and retailers. And again, that brand loyalty is really a myth with few exceptions. But you always need to sort of really understand how you're bringing new customers in at a higher rate than those that you're losing. And, I'm going to use an example in the menswear market, and you're probably saying, I'm in intimate apparel. Why do I need to know what's going on at Hugo Boss? But the truth is, they've been a really, really successful brand. I think their last quarter result, they were up 18%. And again, we know that, total apparel was down 4 or 5%. So there's something that they're doing differently and well. I think over the past 4 years, they were up 244%. And this is only in the part of the business that we track. We don't get their direct sales from their Hugo Boss boutiques. We're just tracking what's in department stores. So what did they do right? And how did their brand grow, essentially? Again, Byron Sharp's theory really kind of explains it. They were a traditional dress-up and sportswear business for years. So what they did differently in a market where consumers are not spending on dress-up clothing in particular, the first one is obvious. They went into activewear, but they did it in a much more polished way, really on brand to sort of the Hugo Boss brand. They totally evolved their tailored and dress-up product to make it much more hybrid, much more comfortable, much more easy to wear. And then they understood the power of sports licenses. And again, particularly for men. Now, again, what's happened in football with Taylor Swift, who knows if there's opportunities in women's for NBA and NFL. But again, it's just, there's these three things that they added to their portfolio that really fueled growth for them. And what's interesting all along is they had all this growth, but they also maintained their dress business. So that's kind of the holy grail of sort of how this strategy works, because you grow things and you sort of maintain your base. That does not happen in a lot of places.
I will say, Todd, so that NFL comment, we looked at, so sports license is a huge driver in apparel, down market, this is growing. And when we looked at the sports license tops, although men make up the majority of sales, women's and kids too grew faster. So I think there absolutely is a market, it's about how you execute it, and NFL being one of the top licenses that we know
Right.
women is driving that growth. So,
it may be a sleep lounge play, quite honestly.
100%.
Yeah, exactly. So, what can we learn from Hugo Boss, and how can we sort of bring this to the intimates market? And at the very high end, and again, that's where that high-end customer is shopping. There's a certain French lingerie brand that for years had very constructed underwire lacy bras during COVID timeframe. They really evolved their total assortment, their marketing, their DTC approach, and also sustainability. They created seamless product that was modern, elevated, and comfortable in both bras and panties. And again, they also created more comfortable wire bras and wire-free bras, really to appeal to a broader cross-section of women. And again, to get more people into their brand. And more recently, they just launched Swim, again, very much in the brand DNA. So again, this is just an example of how it can be done in intimate apparel. The other example, at a more moderate price point, is Vanity Fair. They, again, for the longest time, had focused on constructed underwire and wire-free in the full figure market. Then what they did is they really went after seamless. And, you could have said, oh my gosh, they're probably 15 years late to the market. But the truth is, they wardrobed their customer, they gave her other options, and they grew their brand based on the fact that they were expanding her wardrobe in the intimate shelf. And so again, here's kind of our we always like to sort of have a template for growth, and we're utilizing sort of our checkout tracking data, which is how we track consumers over time and how we learn how they're evolving and where they're actually cheating on you. And so in terms of the women's intimate share of wallet to her total apparel spend, that's dropped about 5%. Now there's more buyers in the category, about 1%. So that's good news. Again, people still want to buy intimate apparel. It's just that they have these other conflicting and competing areas of their spend. And again, what's happening is that spend per buyer is down, and there's two factors sort of making that happen. One, they're buying with less frequency, they're buying less often, and they're spending less. And again, when you think of it, a lot of categories, the ASPs are going up. In the case of intimates, it's going down because people are trading down. And again, that dupe culture is part of that. So we kind of think of sort of, this how brands grow in sort of three sort of growth strategies. One, it's all about being where your consumer is and delivering on value. Again, if she's shopping in ASSG, if she's shopping on Amazon, if she's shopping in clubs, there's opportunities to sort of bring your brand to those channels. Again, be where she is. In Tangle Comfort and Beauty, Soma's done a great job with that. Bally recently is growing, and it's all based on their sort of really sort of beautiful and comfort collections coming together. They've also done a bunch of sort of lacy styles most recently that again are trending well for them. And then sort of expand beyond your merchandising comfort zone. And the great example we use outside of intimates is Lululemon. They went into outerwear, they went into fashion accessories, they went into footwear. Now, again, you obviously want to sort of work within what makes sense for your brand, but there's so much opportunity, again, to sort of go into sleepwear and activewear or more loungewear. And again, that's always evolving. So those are kind of what we think are the tools to really grow in this tough market. And if you have any other questions or want to understand more about the data that we've been talking about, please reach out to Michelle Chris. Everyone knows her in the marketplace. She's our executive director in apparel and business development, and she's a fantastic partner. We work with her all the time with our clients. And I think that's it. Yeah. So thank you so much. So let's get to the questions. Oh, Kristen, you're on mute.
Thank you. There was another question. I want to go back up. Someone had asked one of the first slides when I introduced all of the industries, where does wellness sit in this industry trend list? It's an excellent question. While we don't track, wellness as its own industry, I think wellness is woven throughout so many of the industries. I think it's a big part of that beauty growth. Self-care, whether that's through makeup or skincare, skincare still being an important part of that industry. We're seeing it in equipment, we're seeing it in, vitamins, we're seeing it in apparel. And we're actually currently working on a wellness report that's going to kind of talk about all of the growth engines behind wellness. We are still forecasting that to be growth. I know it's something we talked about after COVID. We were buying humidifiers and air purifiers and all this and water filtrations. Growth is still something that's very important. If you have any questions, I'm actually going to put Michelle's information back up because some of the questions we answer might have some follow-up. But yeah, I know we're working on this report that looks at the overall health and wellness. And if you just email Michelle, we can kind of provide some more information on that.
And there was a question on leggings, and so we track leggings in sportswear as well as we track leggings that are purchased by the hosiery department and the intimate department. So we track sort of all that legging market.
From Holly, how does sustainability, social responsibility in manufacturing and eco-friendly products have any impacts worth noting? So that's an excellent question. It's one that we get often. So I think sustainability is absolutely impacting the industry. However, from some survey work, I think the consumer sentiment is that brands should just be doing good, right? It's table stakes. To be part of the industry, brands should be focusing on efforts. But in terms of driving growth or revenue, we're not seeing it as much. I think a lot of that sentiment was impacted during COVID, where we just had other problems. Brands had other problems and consumers had other problems. Now, as that question starts to come up a bit more, again, I think consumers are still dealing with inflation and making ends meet. I don't think they have the financial flexibility to spend more on something that's maybe sustainable, whether that's eco-friendly, recycled, whatever sustainability measure. So I think consumers do still care about it, but they expect brands to do good. And we're just not seeing the consumer's ability to spend more in order to do it.
And all we can say about the French lingerie brand is it's one of the largest French lingerie brands that's sold in the U.S. market. And I mentioned brands like Vanity Fair and Bally in the moderate space that are doing well. There was a question on that, so.
Okay. Is there? I know we have a.
Do you have any? I don't know where I am on the screen, but anyway, I can't see myself.
We could see you, Ellen.
Okay. So are we, I have a question, Todd, and maybe you mentioned it and I didn't hear it. When you say leggings are tracked, or maybe it's for Kristen, there was a time when it was a massive trend. Where is it in the world?
Yeah, excellent question. So we do see leggings are growing, but it's different. So leggings as a trend, you know, maybe 10 or so years ago, it was cotton pull-on leggings. We wore it, you know, alternatively, there was a long top trend, high shaft boots. It was more so your 100% cotton leggings. That changed to more active leggings, right? Lululemon, you know, sporty with the growth of sneakers. We saw this sporty look that started to develop. Now where leggings sits, it's really active bottoms driving that growth, but it's new styles and silhouettes. It's flare, it's bell bottom, it's boot cut. So newer silhouettes that are driving growth that aren't just being worn with sneakers, they're being worn with loafers, flats, worn with a blazer. So it's leggings that may sit in the active world, but also can look like a dress pant. So it's really where we're seeing the growth being driven.
That was why I was asking, because there are intimate apparel brands that do really, some of them are shapewear brands, but those leggings are sold as apparel.
Right.
They're heavier, or they're, you know, of a different fabrication that you wouldn't go to the gym in. Yeah,
and we track both. We track hosiery and we track active and cotton.
Right. So I see Tina, there was some written questions. If Karen can remind us of those written questions, that would be awesome. And Amy had a question on sort of the consumer mindset shifting and preference around smaller startup brands versus large prominent brands. And you know, it's interesting. I think it's wherever there's innovation, brands, whether it's big or small, the brands will do well. Again, we in footwear is a great example, like, you know, the Ons of the world, the Hokas of the world, the Uggs of the world are really taking the big guys on, you know, by storm. But again, there's still innovation happening with large brands as well. And wherever there's innovation, that's where the growth happens. And again, I think, and DTC brands were really, really interesting, but now they're just sort of part of the marketplace now. So it's just being a DTC brand alone isn't going to sort of be enough to sort of nudge the consumer unless you've got some really great product. And so.
And that's a great point, Todd. And that we've seen DTC brands need retailers and retailers need DTC brands. You know, one thing that Glossier, all of these brands they've taught us you need to be in store.
Right.
And Tina, I have your question. Do you see a change in consumer purchasing of warm weather and sleepwear fabrics like thermal and fleece due to climate change, either overall or geographically?
So we track that business. That's not something that sort of we don't talk about that publicly. But you know, Michelle can help you find that out and sort of discover how that market is doing.
From Margaret, what is the size of the period panty and who are the biggest players?
So we now track period panties in our point of sale data. It's an attribute. So any period panties that are sold at Walmart, Target, Amazon, Macy's, any of the sporting goods stores, that kind of thing, we're tracking period panties. And there's definitely growth happening there. And what we're noticing when we look at the top growth brands, there are definitely period panties by different brands showing up there. It still is relatively small. It's about 2% of the panty business. But if you were to look at that demographically, I think you would see some dramatic shifts because, again, this is a whole re-education for a younger consumer, and they're really sort of adopting this as something that's that they like. And again, I'll use the example. I think I shared this the last time. You know, the traditional feminine care product companies are now purchasing our data to sort of understand what's going on in that marketplace. And I think Kimberly Clark bought NYX and things like that. So there's the fem care brands are definitely concerned about the period panty and how that's affecting consumer behavior. And again, that's one of the really cool things about Circana. We can kind of look at both of those markets and see what's happening because obviously P&G on the CPG side and Kimberly Clark are big clients of ours.
Todd, I'm asking directly because you can hear me.
Yeah.
I'm very curious about the I don't want to say breast health business, because one of the statistics that came out in one of our webinars is that 50-something% of women, like 51% of women, I don't know if it's in this country or worldwide, have had an issue where they need a specific bra because of breast health. And that's not tracked as a separate category, I gather.
Yeah, that's not something that we track specifically. So I wish I had it. And it's not something we put in our consumer tracker as well.
It just might be a curious piece of information if that statistic is true.
Yes, most definitely. Most definitely.
Okay.
Oh, there we go. Yeah. And Intimate specifically has settled down in that 31% of the market.
I'm just going to say that question out loud. So Margaret had asked, is D2C revenue in this market greater than brick and mortar? But I think she's talking about period panties. I apologize, Margaret. I misread your question. I thought you were talking about D2C versus brick and mortar in the total market.
Yeah. And Intimates essentially follows the same pattern. It's just a little lower.
Do you know when it comes to period panties, Todd, if there's online versus?
The market, well, we don't split out point of sale that way. So
No.
Unfortunately, we don't have that measure. I'm trying to think if there's any way we could do that, but I don't think we have.
Okay. And then we had some other questions from June of Danico. Marshall talks a lot about brands not giving consumers a reason to shop, that there isn't enough newness, fashion, or innovation. How can we explain the Skims effect? Most of the assortment is just plain t-shirts and wire-free bras, but Nordstrom continues to fund it as other retailers also put open to buy behind it. How long will Skims continue to dominate on basics and just what is the consumer looking for?
Kristen, do you want to take this one, or I can?
Sure. Listen, I think it's a great question, right? How much complete newness and innovation are we seeing from that brand? It's questionable, to your point. But I think along with newness is something that's completely new, but also something that's marketed in a different way. I think when we talk about newness, it encompasses all of that. Another example is New Balance. New Balance is doing extremely well, but it's really what they're doing is kind of marketing some of their best sellers in a new way, focusing on different colors. That's what I think Skim has done. I mean, Kim Kardashian is a master marketer, and I think, is the product totally revolutionary to the industry? No, but you know what? She did lean into a soft color assortment, a color palette that no one was really doing at the time. And she's just marketed the hell out of it. And I think that's what really is driving all of that growth.
And she had a great retail partner. I mean,
yeah.
Nordstrom as well as her DTC business, but she had a great retail partner. And,
Yeah.
You could argue whether whether there's too much skims in a department, but.
And I will say, I do think while it's nothing new, I think the way that she leaned into the shaping and, I feel like there was no other brand that really was focusing on bodysuits and that kind of way and making them look good. There's a way to look good and feel good wearing them, a different neckline. Like I think it was nothing completely revolutionary, but she leaned into a lot of that assortment. Great color assortment in a few different styles. And it was almost easy, right, to shop and to plan. So, are you anticipating a slowing down in that, Todd? I mean, Skims isn't completely dominant, although they are driving the bodysuit category. Do you think that growth is going to slow down?
No, I don't. And part of it is, so we don't see their DTC sales, so we can only track sort of what we're seeing in the marketplace. So we can't offer a really definitive answer on that. There's a question on sort of where does Spanx fit into the industry these days? I think it's from JP. And again, Spanx, as I kind of talked about, there's been this real dupe influence in shapewear. And so that has affected some of the branded product. And so they are looking to sort of how they expand how they expand beyond their core categories. So there's still a major player and great innovation, but they have been hurt by lower priced social media savvy brands sort of stealing share. Because again, and I didn't say this, but all of our jobs now, because this market is sort of normalizing, it's all about stealing share from your competition. That's all of our jobs now. So.
There was another question from June. It's a great question. I wanted to make sure that we answered it. 2022 was a record year for many brands as consumers got back to their normal lives post-COVID, and their wardrobe, I love that, became overstocked, which is great for 2022, but hurt 2023. With inflation still a major problem for consumers, do you think they will continue to reach for what they already have instead of buying something new? Yeah, so like we saw with total apparel, and Todd, you had mentioned this, overstocked wardrobes and overstocked drawers, all of that replenishment it pulled forward sales. So the purchasing that we would have seen over the past year, all of that was pulled forward in 21 and 22. And I think now as spending continues to be limited, consumers will rationalize, groceries are more expensive than ever, daycare is more expensive than ever, I have to get a new car. So all of these other purchases, I just bought a bra, I could still get, use out of it, it's still good. So I think they're continuing to rationalize a lot of those recent purchases, but that's why we are forecasting growth in the year to come.
Right. And the swim market also is another great example where the customer's just saying, my wardrobe's big enough, I'm good, I can go on that trip. No one's seen this bathing suit, this where we're going, and we'll be fine, something.
All right, are there any other questions?
Really great questions. Probably.
Yeah.
You guys are always the best.
I have a question, but I don't know if it's relevant to this dialogue in terms of what is social media really doing for sales?
A lot.
A lot.
Because
Kristen is the expert on that. Kristen's the expert.
I don't know about that. No, I mean, it's Todd had mentioned dupes.
Right.
It is.
I've got my friendship bracelet
on. What's interesting though, Ellen, with what if there's a change to TikTok, I know that's a big hot topic right now, but currently just what we're looking for, I mean, we continue to see social media have such a huge impact. I'm just trying to pull up, I know I have some stats at my fingertips and I'm trying to quickly get them up and just talk and cover time. But it's something we're constantly talking about. And we just did some survey work asking consumers about social media influences. And 64% of consumers said that they made a purchase of something because they saw it on social media. And it was, of course, higher among younger consumers, 18 to 44. So 75% of 18 to 44, 3/4 of 18 to 44-year-olds said that they purchased something because they saw it on social media. I will tell you, everyone talks about TikTok and Instagram. We are still seeing Facebook as having the highest influence. When we ask which platform did you see the item, it was Facebook, continues to be the highest in terms of responses. And I will say 38% said they purchased social media. They purchased the item online following a link provided directly on the platform.
That's what I was that was my question. Do they see it and it's a great marketing tool and they end up buying it in a store, in a brick and mortar store, or do they actually go straight through to the direct online? Because the statistic that was in the chat before about how brick and mortar is still 2/3 of the business kind of contradicts that, no?
Well, it doesn't. It's a big return. You know, we saw post-COVID, there was a big return to stores. And I will tell you, I mean, a few years ago, apparel was like 20, you know, it was in the low 20s.
21%, right?
Yeah, it was still, we've seen a lot of growth, but it's kind of leveled off since COVID. However, and that's just apparel. That's not encompassing of everything.
And Intimates, the top was 36%, was the highest DTC we'd ever measured in COVID.
Plus, if you look at the statistics in intimate apparel and how much of what percentage bras are to the business and how incredibly difficult it is to buy a bra that really fits online, unless you've bought it once, unless you're reordering something you were fit for, but it's still not the same as seeing something beautiful in apparel, and I'm just buying that.
No, absolutely. But customers are very loyal to style and brand, so they're replenishing online.
Okay. Replenishing.
And it was interesting because, like, way back when, I guess maybe 5 years ago when we started, DTC really took off, we kept talking about Amazon, and people were like, who would buy a bra on Amazon? And the truth is, the early brands knew this. They knew that Bally Pasture for Comfort Minimizer, she knew that style. She could go with one click and it'd be delivered to her home in 24 to 48 hours. So that convenience factor and the fact that she's always on the Amazon site ordering things for her home, for her kids, makes it easy. So that's kind of what.
Yeah, but you said replenishment, which is very different than discovering something new.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
But but again, social media can be really great for discovery because, again, people show it on model, you know, that kind of thing. They show it sort of in context of what they're doing, their lifestyle and things like that. And that's very compelling, I think, as well.
Okay. That shapewear and bodysuits. I mean, I feel like I've seen so many where someone, you know, maybe it's not, Todd, I don't want to speak for bras, but it's always, you know, putting on shapewear and I'm going to go put this on and then come back, look at how I look. And I think that's what sparked a lot of growth. And I can tell you, apparel, out of consumers that have purchased something that they saw, apparel was the number one with having the most results. About 40% of consumers saying that they purchased apparel after seeing it on social media.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, this is like, these are the best questions we get from the Underfashion Club. It's always great.
I don't know what happened to the experiential experience of going to a store, but anyway, a good store that knows what they're doing.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, I don't want to take any more of everybody's time. Does anybody else have questions? Did we get any more?
I don't see any more.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. And thank everybody who stayed. And we'll have this online, so it will be open to many more people as usual. Thanks, Todd. Thanks, Kristen.
Thanks for having us. We really
Thank you so
appreciate it.
much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.